Okay, so we're beginning the topic of cash flow forecasting. Remember, this is the first element in component 2 that we're going to look at. And in the class today, we covered what do we think is meant by cash flow. So remember, money in and money out over a period of time. And what is meant by a cash flow forecast, remember that was where you anticipate, you estimate, you guesstimate for the future. So it's not certainty, it's over time, but you look at the cash inflow and the cash outflow for a business over a period of time. You try and make an estimate about what it is. So we're really going to cover the main bits of these in the lesson, where we looked at constructing a cash flow forecast, and you have some clear key terms here. Remember that these are things that you need to go in your key term book. So in this diagram then, there's a couple of pictures, there's a couple of arrows that I'm going to have to draw in here quickly so that you can represent. So I did make reference to this in the lesson on Monday, and what we need to consider in the cash flow cycle when we talk about cash in and cash out, you've got to ask yourselves the question, how much is the money flowing into the business or out of the business? So remember, it's likely to always start at A, where you have some money. We talked about where a new entrepreneur could get money from, and we considered that it would be a variety of different places, and you would use that money to develop some factors of production. So remember, we said that that would be land, labour, capital and enterprise, and we covered them in component 1. So what are you going to do for your business? Well, we need somewhere to sell our products from, and we need a product or a service to sell, and then hopefully on the other side of B, we will have some, we will hopefully have made the sale of our service or product, and we'll get some money coming back into the business. So I think it's important to note that a business will use a variety of different sources when constructing a cash flow forecast. So remember, I said to you, as a new entrepreneur, you would really be dependent on your market research if you've carried any out. And so you could look at whether or not that was possible. And if not, we're looking at what other implications might there be. So let's say, for instance, we could have some similar competitors, and if we approach a bank in order to get some funding, the banks themselves might help you develop your cash flow forecast. That would be particularly good because it's likely that you'll have a local small business bank manager, and he will have contacts within the local area, so can tell you whether or not your guesstimates are along the right kind of line. Now, as your business progresses, you would obviously be producing more and more cash flow forecasts, and it would be a good idea at the end of each month to think, ooh, maybe do I need to rejig this for next month or in the future, because you will know some other things. And so every cash flow that you produce should be a better like of what actually happens. So I've just left the structure here, and this was the example that we did in class, so don't be afraid to look at it again and consider what it is that you could use it for. So, like many of the other topics that we've considered then, really need to think about the how would we build up an analysis question. So it could be something about do you think preparing a cash flow forecast is beneficial? And it could be for a variety of different stakeholders, or it might be that you're trying to weigh up, so you're looking at some of the advantages and some of the disadvantages. So I just thought we would spend some time going through this so that you would be able to develop this in an answer. So if we look at the benefits then, it says you could identify potential cash flow problems in advance. So this is going back to the idea that You will have planned in advance for your best guess as to what's going to happen. So you'll have looked at what kind of inflow is your business going to make from selling your product or service. But then you'll look at, well, which bills do I need to pay? And if you remember the example that we had in class, we decided we wouldn't pay the dividends because they were a payment that was not a necessity. But let's say, for instance, if you had a wage bill or a tax bill to pay, that's much more problematic. And so you could identify the fact that actually you might need a short-term assistance with your cash flow. So it'll help you take appropriate actions. So let's say, for instance, you could decide whether or not to find a short-term source, such as an overdraft, or perhaps you need to look at other things like changing your supplier so that you can get cheaper raw materials, or perhaps you need to look at the price elasticity of your product to find out if you could increase your the product price. In addition to that, though, it'll say long-term actions. So maybe we want to expand our store, or we want to make some renovations, and you would be able to see clearly in advance where it was, at what time you would have sufficient cash. So remember, we have to have sufficient cash to pay suppliers and to make other payments. And so because you will see the timing of these, and remember that we want to get a good credit history, we want to be able to pay our wages on time, it offers you the opportunity of seeing if there's any cash deficits. It will help you when you provide evidence for financial assistance. So this would be really good to have, not just for a long-term bank loan, but for a bank overdraft. So you would be able to show your bank manager, I need it here and it's going to dip here and it's going to peak here. And so it's almost like saying, I need this overdraft for this amount of time, and here's how I've calculated the value of the overdraft that I require. It should avoid the possibility of being forced out of businesses. And really what I mean by that is being put into liquidation because they don't have sufficient money to pay their day-to-day expenses. So many of the businesses that have gone into liquidation, it's the reason that they've failed isn't because their products or services aren't popular. It's because they've been unable to pay some short-term bills. So meet the wage bills or the rent bills or something of the equivalent of that. But it will also show you if you're holding too much cash in the business. Remember that you need to buy things to help your business generate a greater level of profit. So perhaps we want to look at new machinery or technology that will help you transform this into profit. And so you need to look at the opposite side of this then. So there's lots of benefits to our business, but there's actually some drawbacks, and it's more associated to how accurate your planning is. So we could, one of the things that will affect the cash flow forecasting that a business makes is any changes in the economy. So at the minute you could say that we're almost in recovery. It's very slow recovery in the UK, but it's not necessarily in the wider world. So if you decide that you're selling your products outside the UK, you would have different market factors there. We can think about things like what about the unemployment rate? So unemployment rate is reducing in the whole country just now, and that should indicate that people have more a greater income, and you need to find out if that would transfer into disposable income that they might want to spend on your product. So it depends on the price that you have. You could also look at changes in consumer tastes, so fashion and technology. That would be quite a short product life cycle, and so you would need to consider whether or not your product was keeping up with changes in the market or not. A lot of your prospective sales, your planned sales, are a result of market research, and we already know that there is lots of negative aspects of market research, not least just consumer bias in there. Have you got the right size of sample? Did you take it at the right place? Are you really sure that it was adding value to your business? We don't have any control over the competition in our marketplace. So for your direct competition as well as your indirect competition, things that might be substitute products or maybe products that are complementary to yours, or vice versa, we don't know what their actions are going to be. And really, without the ability to predict that, it will impact a lot on whether or not we're successful. And then, of course, there's uncertainty, particularly for new firms. How can you possibly guess what your costs are going to be? But similarly, a business might be hoping to expand and they might want to renovate the premises they're in, or they might want to build a new premises. Well, if you've never done it before, how do you actually know that your costs are likely to be truthful? So as we develop this then, we've got to consider that there are lots of problem areas with our cash flow. And really we're going to try and look in this next stage, well, what can cause cash flow problems in business theory, and then how on earth can we try and improve our cash flow problems. So I've got a couple of new terms for you here, and these are the terms that you should begin to feel comfortable using, although I have to say, so I'll explain what they are first of all. So we'll go with receivables, and I've written in the first part, people who owe the business money. You can put the word customers there. Highlight the word customers because you receive money from customers, and that should be your memory thing for receivables and receiving money. So at some point we have let customers have the product now and pay for it at a later date, and that in business is giving them some credit terms. So theoretically what you want to do is you want to maybe deal with them as a cash payment, a cash transaction for a couple of times, and once you know that they're good for the cash, you might say to them, okay, well, I'll let you have a little bit of credit. So you might offer them a comparably low amount, but something that maybe represents one of their orders, and then you might say to them, and I'll give you 14 days to pay, or I'll give you 28 days. 28 days is quite a popular thing, but you've got to work out as a business whether you think they're good for it after that. Now, if we look on the opposite side, these are payables. So I really like to call them our suppliers is the most obvious one. So we would like to buy our raw materials and we would like to pay for them at a later date. So this is our business organisation getting some credit here. I suppose I also need to say it could be gas, electricity and telephone, because sometimes some businesses pay for that after you've used it. And so payables, we have to pay them the money, and so that should be your little thing about who payables are. So I'm not quite sure exactly what happens to the arrows in this, but I think this would be what your slide would be like. Now this is just an advancement of the first cash cycle that we had in the first section. So remember that we're going to start up here at the top, okay? And it's called the working capital cycle. It represents the amount of cash I'm going to say that in a very loose term, okay, because you might have to do something with it. It's liquid assets, it's cash, but it accounts for things like this credit facility that you may or you may not get. So we're going to start at the top and we're going to pay out some cash to buy some raw materials. Now you'll see there I've given you an option that after we've been able to prove ourselves as a new business entrepreneur, we might get 30 days trade credit. And so that would be really good because actually there might be a delay in the cash outflow. So I'm going to write the word delay here just to remind you that might be true. So we're going to produce our goods. I don't know how long that will take. Some products you might have a very short lifespan, so they might be perishable products like yogurts and milk and things like that. And so you might actually find that this working capital cycle is quite a short time. But if we go back to the example that I had in class when we do whiskey, and some whiskey is sold at 15 years later, you could see that the delay there might be 15 years. Now, I'll also have to pay out some cash on storage, but you might have to pay only the bare minimum because you might have a perishable product that you literally need to produce and sell. But in the opposite ends of that, whiskey lays for 25 years and every year you've got another barrel of whiskey to do this. So you have to consider how much storage you will have to pay for. Now hopefully once we've stored it and we've displayed it, some customers are going to come along and there's going to be a cash inflow because our goods are sold. Now we'll see I've written there that actually we might give some credit terms to our given customers. And so there might be a delay before you can reuse the cash in order to purchase some more raw materials. Now in my diagram there, it looks like all of my arrows are equal. Well, it did in the book anyway. Okay, if you look in your slide, all of those arrows are absolutely equal sizing. Now, I'm worried here because what happens if I have to pay for my suppliers? So what if I have to repay my payables before I've actually sold the products and I've received some money for them? That would then say I would need quite a surplus of cash in my working capital cycle to cover the delay before my customers or credit receivables get me some money and my inflow would rise. So let's just quickly recap some of these things. So you might have already made notes on them. Don't make extra notes if you don't have to. So the length of time the goods are held as inventories. Inventories are just, it's a posh word for stock. Okay, so you could, let's say, think about, so the nature and durability of the product. I've talked about whether it's a perishable good or not. How efficient are your suppliers? How quickly can they pick their stock and distribute it to you? I've got here lead time. Lead time is just a posh way of saying how long the delivery time from placing the order until you receive the order. Got to be thinking about customer expectations. So I think, let's say for instance, if you thought about fashion, you could actually go to lots of high streets, city centres, and you could try and buy whatever fashion item it is in one store. Well, there's quite a lot of choice and there's lots of alternatives. So if they don't have your size, it's likely that you might go and try and find it in another store first. Whereas, let's say for instance, handmade things or personalised things, it would be much more accepting from a consumer's point of view to have to wait for those things. And then you've got to look at your competition. So if they have it in stock and you don't have it in stock, you know who's going to get the sale, don't you? Then I've thought we could look at the time taken for receivables to be paid. So remember, those are customers who've had some goods on credit and they're going to pay at a later date. So let's say, for instance, if you think about the nature of the market, if you think about supermarkets or retailers, they're not really going to have any receivables. You don't go to the Asda and say, oh, I'll take my goods now and I'll pay in 30 days. It just doesn't happen. So there's that kind of thing. If it's, let's say, for instance, you might be a manufacturer. So, I don't know, let's say you're Sony or another electrical manufacturer. Well, you have to sell your products to, I don't know, Currys or various other stores, and then they will sell them on to the customer. So it might be there that you have to wait. And the other thing is, how much bargaining power have you got? If you have a fairly unique identity to your product, you'll be in a much better bargaining power. But actually, if somebody who wants to buy your product can go to lots of different places, you're probably just going to have to do what everybody else is doing. So if they're offering 28 days, you'll have to offer 28 days because it's just too easy for them to go somewhere else. But then you could also think about what is the credit period that you get from your suppliers. So you need to think, you want to have a good credit history. You don't want to annoy them. Because remember, if you delay your payment, they might just say, well, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you any more credit. So it's important to try and think about those things. So we'll need to look at what might cause cash flow problems, and this will be it'll be different for every business that's having a cash flow problem. So you need to look for clues to see if any of these things are true. So it might be that you've got a seasonally demanded product, so something that only sells for a particular period of the year. Let's say, for instance, we talked a lot about Easter eggs. Easter eggs are only available for the first third of the year, and after that they don't sell anymore. But that doesn't mean to say that they can wait until people start buying them to be able to produce them again. So you'll have to incur the cost of stockpiling, paying all of your associated expenses at the same time, and then only receive your cash for a peak period of the year. A lot of businesses, as they attempt to grow, do something called overtrading. It's where you commit yourselves to delivering orders, but actually you don't have any money to go and buy the raw materials to make the order. And so it's almost like you really need to say to them, pay up front first, but because of the given nature of the trading the concept, you probably don't do that. So it's not being able to fulfill orders. You could overinvest in fixed assets. So remember, when we did Raising Finance, we learned about leasing. And I said to you, lots of businesses actually lease things now, like machinery, vehicles, equipment. And the reason for that is because technology and changes, it moves on. So you've got to consider this idea that do you want to be able to replace this every X number of years? Would it be beneficial to have a leasing agreement where maybe they carry out the maintenance? Or do you want to buy the product outright? I'm not sure buying your factory or buying your equipment, or your vehicles, your vans, anything like that. Maybe it's not the best thing to do as you start out. You could offer too much credit sales. Now, this is almost like a double-edged sword, because by offering credit sales, we know we'll get the money in the future. But it's waiting. It's that game of waiting that might be too long for us. We could poorly manage our stock. So let's say, for instance, remember when I talked about fashion retailer? If you didn't have the product in stock, it's likely that somebody else could provide it to your customers. So this idea that you're not being able to meet customer demand is stock management. You could have a poor management of your suppliers. So maybe you're not asking suppliers to give you the best deal. Maybe you've chosen an inefficient supplier. So even though they've said, oh yeah, we'll guarantee overnight delivery, 3 days later you're still waiting. So you've got to look at what makes a good supplier, and are you ensuring that you get the best deal from them? There could be some unforeseen change. So the horse meat scandal, something like that. You've got all your products produced and you can't sell any of them because consumers have decided that they're not doing that. The bird flu, that was another example. So I suspect maybe food is quite susceptible to that. And last one, it's making losses or having low profit. This is a bit of an abstract one, and unless you're absolutely comfortable with this, I would actually prefer that you chose one of the earlier ones. I don't think this is an AS topic. I think this is something that would definitely be a synoptic topic at A level, so at the end of year 13. But I will just touch on it a little bit. A business making a loss or a business making very low profit usually doesn't instill confidence in customers. So you'll think, well, I could buy something from them tomorrow and they could have my money, and then they could be in liquidation next week, so I'm going to have lost that money. Or it might have been the fact that you buy an electrical item and you get a 12 months guarantee from the shop. Will they still be there in 12 months? And that in itself will have an impact on your ability to generate sales. So it's got nothing to do with the profit bit. It's just the fact that it looks like you would be a business that's struggling, and so consumers won't buy from you, and so you won't have any cash inflow, but you're still having to make all of your cash outflow. So obviously we've got some sources to try and help with the cash flow forecast, with the cash flow issues. Now, I'm not going to talk about any of these at the minute. The only one I'm going to look at is some of the things that I've said for improving working capital control. So let's say, for instance, if you're offering customers credit sales, have you done a credit check on them? Do you absolutely know that you've got to try and build up a relationship that says, oh yes, I think they're going to pay in the future? Do you manage your stock well? Are you the kind of business that needs to have products on your shop floor for customers to buy them? Are you fully utilising your cash? So you don't need to be stockpiling cash. You need to be investing it wisely for your business. But apart from that, all of the other ones, they're what you would have known from raising finance. So I need you now to do something and go back and look at your notes for raising finance and write, how do these things help the cash inflow and how do they help the cash outflow? I'm going to make a suggestion then. A lot of people, when they're trying to say, oh, we could do this to improve cash flow, they talk about trying to improve our profitability. We don't have cash, so don't tell me I need to spend cash in order to do something. A bank overdraft is always the first port of call, because that will be cash flowing into your business. You will be, well, it's not cash flowing into your business. Sorry, take that back. It's the ability for you to spend and keep spending more money out of your bank account because you've got authority to do so. So it's the ability for you to pay off all of these expenses. It's to continue with the cash outflow of your business. And at a later date, when you receive the inflows, you'll be able to reduce the bank overdraft. So I like to summarise this by looking at how can you possibly improve your cash flow. Well, there's two things that you need to do. We either need to think, how can we increase the cash inflow? So that's the top section. Or how can we decrease the cash outflow? Now that might just be moving the timing of it in order for an inflow to have happened. So ways that we can increase our cash inflow then: getting goods to the market in the shortest possible time. Do you have the correct distribution methods? Do you have maybe shops that have taken off or some of the internet off of the internet sales? That is instantaneously getting your product to the market. Getting paid as quickly as possible. Are you really in an industry where customer credit is the norm? Why don't you offer a discount? Lots of people are enticed by discounts, and that usually means that they'll promptly pay you. Remember that the longer a payment takes to get in, the greater chance that you're never going to get this payment. You've got to be able to control your debtors. So how do you manage these customers who owe you money? What methods do you employ in order to try and get them? And of course, as a last resort, you could always sell your debts to a debt factorer. What about the cash outflow then? Right. Obtain the maximum possible credit for purchase. Sway your suppliers so that they believe you're good for the money. Ask them, can I have 10 days credit? Then, once you've proven you can have 10 days credit, ask them if you can have 21 days credit. Bargain with them. Show them that you think that they're a valuable supplier to you. Try and keep control of your costs. So do you actually look for getting the best deal? So we talk a lot about changing energy suppliers and that. That's still all right for businesses to do that. They can employ some of the same methods that normal consumers can. And you've got to find a way to keep your stock of raw materials to minimum. So later on this year, we learn about something called just-in-time stock management. So you've got to decide, like let's say for instance, if I haven't got a product on my shop, on the shop floor, and I say to customers, I can have it here for tomorrow morning, that might just be enough to sway people with that. To come back and purchase from you. If you've got, I don't know, let's say you're a manufacturer and a customer comes to you and say, I really need 25 of these by tomorrow. Can you deliver? You've got to try and ensure that you've got enough for like odd occasions like that, but aren't spending too much on it. Now, our finally, I'm just going to talk. We mentioned earlier that there were some difficulties, almost reasons why you have cash flow problems. And so the last kind of thing that I really want to talk about is why are there some drawbacks? Because it sounds so good when we're talking about it in theory that, oh, you can do this and you can avoid this. So you need to work out why there are some, why it might not be as easy to solve these cash flow problems quickly or to the best of your ability. So let's look at some of the drawbacks that will make this difficult. So we've talked about, oh, I could ask my bank for a bank overdraft. Now, that sounds great, but in the long run, every pound that you're using in the overdraft will incur an interest payment, and that is a much more expensive interest payment than the interest payment on a bank loan, let's say. So you've really got to decide, is that the best way in order to solve your cash flow shortage? We could think about debt factoring then. So you would get maybe 90% of the value of the debt. But then I would say to you, what's going to happen to the relationship between you and your customers? If they find that you've sold it to a debt factoring business, you need to think about, will they continue to buy from you in the future, and how will it damage cash inflows in the future? We could sell one of our assets. Now, that's not going to be suitable for a newer business because it's unlikely that you'll have some assets to actually sell. And even businesses who have assets to sell, how long do you think it'll take to actually sell these assets? And if you want a quick sale, you're going to have to accept a really ridiculously low price for it. When we think about sale and leaseback, that sounds a really good idea, especially for property. But leasing always has an end date. So what if you're in a prime location and, I don't know, let's lease it for 50 years. Well, say there's 3 years to go. Are you going to negotiate this again? You want to stay in the prime, is it still prime location? So it's also the fact that, you'll have to pay a fee each month to use these things, which if you were to use it for years and years, could quickly be larger than the value of the asset in the first place. Also, as you sell off your business's assets, you've got less to use as security for a bank loan, and so you might find that eventually the banks don't want to lend you any money. So you could lease non-current assets without selling them back to start with, but it's the same difficulties as what we've seen above. You could look to cash management. So this idea that, let's have a pot as a rainy day fund. It's a contingency fund. I think that's really good, but by not using it doesn't mean to say that you're fully utilising it to help you generate profit in the long term and ensure growth for your business. So it's almost like a fine line that you have to draw. We could try and chase receivables for prompt payment. So this might be better than using a debt factoring business, and you might still have a portion of goodwill for your customers, but maybe you just have to accept that all customers are going to take 28 days and you can't do anything about it until after that fact, and only then perhaps build up customer relations. So don't just have anybody in your firm ring in to chase the debt. Perhaps you could have one specific person and they could actually build up customer-supplier relation. You could try and reduce your inventory levels. So the only problem with that is you'll have cash to do anything else with, but you might not be able to make the sales and get the cash from the sales because you might not have the products available. And finally, you could try and delay payments to your payables. So you could try and say to your suppliers, you've asked for payment in, let's say 14 days. I'm going to try and wait till like 21 days. Now, there's an instant problem that I think there will be a loss of goodwill. Your relationship will flounder. And I'm thinking, what if they turn around and say to you, sorry, cash up front on all future orders? What kind of impact would that have on your cash flow forecast?